Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name is Joe Balcom. I'm a county supervisor over here in Johnson County. Thanks for tuning in. If this is the first time you're seeing us, you're watching a community affairs program on state and local issues of interest to Iowa. We're on in about 14 communities around the state of Iowa every week. If you've been tuning in before, thanks for coming back. We have an interesting show tonight. We're going to be talking about utility deregulation and concern about that and the impact on Iowa consumers. Our guests tonight are Bob Haug, the Executive Director of the Iowa Municipal Utility Association, and Lisa Davis-Cook, the Program Organizer for the Iowa Seed Coalition. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Bob, what do you do with the Iowa Municipal Utility Association? What is that organization?
Well, our association represents 545 cities across Iowa that operate a municipal utility. All of our members operate water utilities. 137 of them operate electric utilities, and there are 47 municipal gas systems.
Okay.
So we lobby for them.
City-run organizations?
Yes, city-run utilities.
Okay. So run and overseen by city councils?
About half of our city councils and independent boards of trustees, about half and half.
Very good. Lisa, what does the Iowa Seed Coalition do? What are they about?
The Iowa Seed Coalition is an alliance of 19 consumer, environmental, low-income, religious, and family farm organizations that represent over 150,000 Iowans that are committed to using renewable energy here in this state and increasing our use of homegrown energy. The Seed Coalition stands for Sustainable Energy for Economic Development.
Very good. We're talking about utility deregulation tonight and a national effort. Legislation passed, I don't know when exactly, a few years ago, focusing on this question at the federal level, and it's coming to Iowa. Bob, what's involved in utility deregulation, and how does it relate to what we're doing right now in terms of how we regulate utilities?
What you've called deregulation, those of us insiders, I guess, tend to call it restructuring.
Okay.
Because it's not strictly deregulation, it's a lot of re-regulation. What will be done with the electricity industry is basically what was done to the railroad, trucking, telecommunications industries before ours. And that means direct retail competition for some services in the electricity business. What it means specifically is that consumers will be able to choose in the future what generator of electricity will produce their electricity.
I see.
They'll still be moving those electrons over transmission lines that are regulated by the federal government and local distribution lines that are regulated in all likelihood by the state.
I see. So, Lisa, is this like we've seen with the phone companies where we are now, you can get a phone call any night of the week from another phone company wanting to sell you services?
Yes.
Is that where we're headed with our electricity?
Absolutely. If the electric utility industry is opened up to competition, it's going to be just like the telecommunications deregulation all over again, where, as you said, now our dinner will be interrupted by electric companies calling us to sell us service rather than the phone companies.
I see. I just got my hands on a report by the Iowa Office of Consumer Advocate. It's a technical report, and I would like to cite just a couple pieces out of this to kick off our conversation. It's from their executive summary. Their study indicate that the average rates in Iowa would go up in a competitive generation market, which I assume is what we're talking about here, with the owners of Iowa baseload plants, utility companies, receiving over $100 million in revenues in excess of their generating costs. It goes on to say that the implication of this study is that ratepayers in Iowa as a group will be harmed by a move to a deregulated competitive generation market. What should we be thinking about this report, Bob, or maybe not so much this report, but their findings about increasing costs to Iowa ratepayers? Why will that be the case?
Well, that study really put numbers to something that we have been saying is a risk for Iowa in this restructuring. There are in the nation high-rate states and low-rate states. If you move to competition, there will be a price at which energy is sold, a market clearing price. Some states have the capacity to generate electricity below that price. Others will generate it above it. Iowa is a low-rate state.
Okay.
If you compare industrial rates in Iowa to those in Illinois, just for example, the average Illinois industry pays rates that are 42% higher than rates here in Iowa. If you compare it with California, Pacific Gas and Electric, a large utility out there, their industrial customers pay about 88% more. What a competitive retail market will do, we think, is to level those rates among the states.
I see.
And in Illinois, it means that, or between Iowa and Illinois, we believe it means somewhat higher rates in Iowa and lower rates in Illinois.
I see. So Iowa consumers have pretty low rates now, and
Among the lowest in the nation, particularly the industrial rates. I believe they rank in around the 6th from the bottom, which is not bad for a state that imports virtually all of its sources of energy.
right.
And I think if you look at, again, Iowa and Illinois as examples, you can see what happened and get an understanding for who the winners and losers are likely to be. In Illinois, the investor-owned utilities there continued to build power plants, particularly high-cost nuclear power plants, well beyond the need of Illinois consumers. In Iowa, in the 70s, the legislature, urged on by consumer and environmental groups and others, put a limit on how much of a return utilities could earn on new generating capacity. And as a result, we didn't build as many power plants as in Illinois. We avoided the expensive nuclear plants kind of by accident of history, and so our generating costs are very low. What this study shows is that if you estimate the market clearing price for electricity, the difference between that price and the cost of generating from our base load plants would be about $100 million a year. And who wins and who loses depends on who gets that benefit, whether it's shareholders of investor-owned utilities or consumers.
Sure. So investor-owned utilities, are they prepared to reap some big benefits at the expense of municipal providers and rural providers?
Oh, I think the investor-owned utilities are the ones that stand to really benefit from deregulation, along with your large industrial customers. Iowa consumers are really going to be hurt from the standpoint that when utility companies, investor-owned in particular, go out looking for customers, their number one priority is going to be your large industrial customers because they have the biggest load, therefore that's where the utilities can stand to make the most money. So these companies are going to be, really wined and dined to go with a certain utility, given very good deals, what we like to call sweetheart deals, and the Iowa consumer, your small business or your residential customer, is going to be left to pick up the difference in that profit margin for the utility companies. So the utility companies really stand to benefit by selling here and also being able to sell their low-cost power across state lines, and the Iowa consumer is going to be the one that gets hit the hardest.
So in the last few years, we've seen a move to try and develop alternative energy supplies in Iowa. What will be the impact on that, Lisa, in terms of the wind program that's out there with?
Right now, Iowa generates about 1.2% of our electric generation from renewable sources, whether they be wind power, solar energy, biomass, or a few of the types of renewable energy out there. We're just at the very beginning of the potential for Iowa. As Bob said earlier, Iowa imports virtually all of its energy into the state. We import about 97%, yet we rank among the highest in states as far as our wind potential. We have a vast amount of windy areas out there that could generate enough power to really boost a new budding industry in this state. And our greatest fear is that as restructuring takes off, the utility companies are going to be very concerned with low-cost generation, which means they're going to go back to their coal-fired generation plants and things like that, which right now, yes, do have a lower cost, but in the long run, when you take into account environmental costs and things like that, your renewables are a much better deal, and so they really stand to lose in this deregulation scenario.
Sure. So a clean energy or green energy, it sounds like we're going to have trouble getting that to go in the future. What about energy efficiency programs? Iowa's had a pretty rigorous program historically. I think we've backed up a little bit from that. Bob, what is going on? What can we do as a state as this restructuring occurs to encourage efficiency in how we reward utilities?
Well, in theory, at least, energy efficiency will be a player in the marketplace, and we hope that that investments in energy efficiency will continue to some extent. Up until just recently, the state has mandated spending on energy efficiency by utilities across the state. It's been voluntary for municipals, I should point out, although we have met the same spending levels as investor-owned utilities. I do think it's likely to suffer to some extent, particularly in the short run. And I think that's unfortunate because, again, we're importers of electricity. And in the years that we have been engaged in energy efficiency programs, I think we've only scratched the surface of what could be done in the state.
Seems likely. Last time I checked, Iowa was spending about $5 billion on imported energy or on energy in general, and all that's money leaving our state. I mean, even small improvements, 5–10% would amount to hundreds of millions of dollars kept in our local economies. In the municipal, we have a few very good examples. Osage is one that immediately comes to mind, where they've done quite a bit of economic development through saving money on utilities, something everybody likes to do. What is going to be as we talk about the big users probably are going to be okay. I know here in Johnson County we've already been approached by our local utility wanting to sign a special agreement for our business. We haven't done that. What's going to happen to the consumer out there, and what are some of the possible scenarios, Lisa?
Our big fear is that, number one, they're just going to get out-shopped and out-hustled for the good deals. Another big worry that we have with small residential customers, especially rural areas and low-income areas, is something called redlining, where a utility will choose not to service an area because they are too expensive to get the lines to, or they are too much of a risk factor involved in payment of bills and things like that. So I think that's something that we have to look at too, in ensuring that every customer still has access to affordable power.
Very good. You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. With us is Bob Haug, the Executive Director of the Iowa Municipal Utility Association, and Lisa Davis-Cook, the program organizer with the Iowa Seed Coalition, a coalition of folks working on alternative energy and energy issues. I'd like to tell you about a couple resources you might be interested in on this topic tonight, energy deregulation or utility restructuring. This is a report, the Technical Bureau report, by the Iowa Office of Consumer Advocate, and we'll give you the phone number there. You can call them and get a free copy of it. It's kind of technical, but it does provide some analysis about what's going on in Iowa. The other place you can go is a website. It's the American Local Power News website, and it's a source for articles and information nationally on utility restructuring. I was just looking at that site in the last couple of days. There's an excellent article on community aggregation or consumer aggregation, where they're focusing on consumer choice. Back to our guests, Bob, in terms of consumer choice, there's this idea out there about community aggregation, where if a city council sat down and negotiated an agreement for all the consumers in their town, that they'd be able to buy in a bigger quantity of energy. What do you think of that idea, and are we going to see that in Iowa?
I think it's an idea that makes a lot of sense for our state. We're a state that has more municipal utilities than any other except Nebraska. Nebraska doesn't allow investor-owned utilities, so I think that we're part of the fabric, and what we're really talking about with community aggregation are municipal utilities without wires. The notion is that, and in fact, this came out of, this idea has been encompassed in the restructuring legislation that recently passed in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is one of 13 states to advance restructuring legislation. And in their proposal, a community, by vote of the city council or by an election on a petition of voters, would take over the role of going out into the marketplace. The city would take over the role of going out into the marketplace to get the best deal for any customers within the community. If a customer wanted to go off on their own or go with a different aggregator, they're free to do that, but the default aggregator of load would be the city, and that provides some real benefit to those many customers who would not otherwise be interested in trying to shave a fraction of a cent one way or another off their power bill. And for less attractive customers who may not be courted by marketers and other utilities for a good deal in electricity. We think that makes a lot of sense here.
Well, yeah, I was reading recently that 60% of people, when the phone became deregulated and people started getting calls, 60% of folks never left AT&T as their main provider. My sense is we'd see that same kind of thing happen, even though we get dozens of phone calls over the course of a year trying to get us to change utility companies. So this community aggregation idea, when will we see legislation in Iowa, Lisa? Do you think in the next year, a year from now, in terms of moving this forward?
If you would have asked me that a couple months ago, I would have said we will definitely see something in this coming legislative session. Right now, indicators kind of point to maybe something being introduced this session, but not necessarily passed during this session, with it being a shorter legislative session and with it being an election year and there being a lot of other big issues out there. I don't know if the legislature will actually tackle a big issue such as restructuring, but I think definitely it's on the way, and it's something that the large industrial users are going to push for in the next year or two, and probably by next year the investor-owned utilities will look at pushing something through as well. There are bills out there floating around that are ready to go when when they say go, but as of lately, I would say probably next year is when we'll look at it.
Okay. Bob, there's bills out there. Have you seen any of those, and how do they look? Do you have a sense of that, or do the municipals have a bill ready to roll?
We do not have a bill. We do not have a bill. We're aware that one of the investor-owned utilities has a bill that they're circulating, at least in concept form. The industrial customers have developed a bill, the large industrial customers. And we expect during the next several months leading up to the '99 session of the Iowa legislature that a bill will come forward out of the Iowa Utilities Board. And so there will be, I think, at least 3 bills, probably more, introduced in the '99 session. Whether they pass, and if they pass, how much of a time frame there is between passage and direct retail competition is anybody's guess. I think we would be looking at least out to 2001, 2002 before most consumers would see a choice in electricity provider.
I see.
Now that choice is the word that you're going to hear because it sounds very positive. Everybody likes choice in virtually everything. There are, however, a number of risks. We've pointed out some. One risk is obviously that our rates could actually go up while Illinois' rates go down. Other risks that we see revolve around other changes that are going on within the electricity industry. For example, we've seen a period of consolidation over the last several years where mergers and acquisitions have reduced the number of potential competitors. We question how effective competition can be if we're getting fewer and fewer competitors. So that's a risk. We have to watch it closely. Also, the ownership of transmission facilities presents a risk. If the large traditional utilities can control competition by the way they operate their transmission systems, then this could be kind of an empty promise of competition. The reality will be that the large utilities will continue to control competition. So we need to work on ways that limit their ability to kind of stack the deck against effective competition. Those are things that need to be done before we can move forward.
Lisa, what is the Iowa Seed Coalition going to do to make sure the deck doesn't get stacked against consumers?
Right now, the Iowa Seed Coalition works with, not only our coalition, but also a group called the Iowa Citizens Energy Alliance, which the municipal utilities, along with the AFL-CIO and a number of other groups across the state are involved in. We will just be there to fight for consumers. We will, look at the legislation that comes about and see what's in it for consumers, see what's in it for the environment, and really be out there watching and letting citizens know how they can get involved, what the bills are saying, how they will affect them and their monthly utility bills, and just, encourage ordinary Iowans to contact their legislators and let them know what they think about it.
Great. We're going to give some information in a moment about how to contact both of you for more information. One of the other provisions or interests out there is this whole concept of universal access. Bob or Lisa, what's going on with universal access? What does that mean?
Universal access kind of goes back to what I spoke of before with the redlining issue.
Okay.
Right now, utility companies are required to service everyone within their given service territory. With open competition, that will no longer be the case. Mid-American will not have to service everyone in Des Moines. With universal access being a part of deregulation, that is saying that every Iowan is guaranteed service by someone, and they have to be provided service by someone. Normally there ends up being a provision such as a provider of last resort, where if someone does not pick a provider, then a provider is chosen for them, whether it be their community aggregator or their previous utility. That is yet to be decided, but we just want to make sure that that rural customer is not prevented from getting service, or that low-income customer in the inner city is prevented from getting service.
Very good. Bob, you mentioned Massachusetts. Are there other states that could be models for us, or are we still pretty early on in this process?
Pretty early on. There are 13 states have passed legislation. A couple of them have provided for access, although I might point out that California consumers were supposed to be able to choose their electric provider beginning January 1st of this year. That's been delayed for 3 months, maybe delayed again, because the computer technology to ensure that the system doesn't break down, the transmission system doesn't break down, just isn't in place yet.
I see.
Few states have passed legislation that we can learn from, because with only one exception, all of them have been what I would call high-rate states. I gave you some of the numbers earlier. Montana is the one exception to that. Montana is a low-rate state like Iowa and Wisconsin. However, this may be a bit complicated to describe to your viewing audience, but Montana Power is the investor-owned utility in Montana. They fought to pass restructuring legislation there, and their state, like Iowa, where the cost of generation is lower than what's expected to be the market price. And recently, Montana Power announced that it would be selling off its low-cost generating plants and hydroelectric facilities, and in a sense, pocketing the difference between, or some portion of the difference between their current production costs and where they expect the market to be. That means the shareholders are going to do real well for Montana Power. The consumers to whom those generating plants had been dedicated are likely to pay more for their electricity, and that again is the fear that we have for Iowa.
I can see that. So there is a bit of uncertainty out there as well, I assume. I mean, this report indicates that it looks like it's going to cost us more because our rates are low. Lisa, why are our rates low in Iowa? Is there a reason for that?
More than anything, we just have very low-cost generation, which in a way is good for consumers. But then we look at the environmental side of it, and we have a lot of coal-fired plants and a lot of plants that they don't cost as much to generate the electricity, so therefore it keeps our rates low now. But as shortages of supply and things like that come in, we need to look at alternates of generating just strictly from coal and other fossil fuels, and look more into some alternate energy production.
So Iowa needs to get greener, it sounds like, in how we generate. I understand that Iowa requires about 25% of its energy from nuclear sources. Does that make sense? Have you heard that before? I heard that in the last year. Is that an accurate figure, Bob?
I don't know those
Okay.
numbers, Joe. That sounds high. We've
Okay.
had Palo is the only plant
Right.
in Iowa. Mid-American operates at least one plant in Illinois, and they contract for power from a nuclear plant in Nebraska.
Sure. So we're getting down to the end here. Any last closing comments on how people can get involved in this issue, Lisa?
I think people just need to educate themselves on this issue. It's a very, very technical issue, and it's something that has a lot of different facets to it. And I worry that people are going to think, oh, well, it's not going to affect me. But the bottom line is, it really is going to affect people. They need to find out about this issue. They need to see exactly what, all the different aspects of it are. This is going to affect every person in Iowa, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're rural, whether you're urban. You need to take a look at it, see where you fit into the whole scheme of things, and the bottom line is let your legislator know how you feel on it, and that you will not pay more for your electricity, and let them know that you're watching what's
Great.
going on with
Great.
it.
Good advice. We're getting down to the end. I'd like to thank you both, Bob Haug and Lisa Davis-Cook, for being on the show tonight talking about utility restructuring. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I'd like to thank our crew for doing the work tonight, our contributors and our local sponsors that make it possible for you to see this show around the state. We've enjoyed being with you. If you have ideas for us, we're going to give you some information on how to send them to us for future shows or guests for the show. Remember, this is just a TV program. What's important is what you are doing in your community each and every week to make it a better place to live. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next time.